Europe is on edge, bracing for what was once unimaginable, a direct clash between NATO and Russia. The situation is reminiscent of the darkest days of the Cold War, when the world held its breath during the Cuban Missile Crisis, fearful that a single misstep could trigger nuclear war. Now, for the first time in decades, similar anxieties grip the continent, and the stakes are every bit as high. In recent days, the United States has removed crucial barriers, allowing Ukraine to strike targets deep inside Russian territory. This single step has rattled capitals across the globe, marking a dangerous escalation in the conflict. It is a move that echoes President Kennedy's decision to blockade Cuba in 1962, a calculated risk that could either deter aggression or provoke catastrophe. Moscow's reaction was swift and ominous. Under President Putin's personal oversight, Russia unleashed sweeping nuclear force drills, launching intercontinental missiles, deploying submarine barrages, and sending bombers aloft. The intent is unmistakable. Russia is signaling that it is prepared to raise the stakes. In the past, such shows of force, like the Able Archer exercises of 1983, nearly led to disastrous misunderstandings, so today's maneuvers send chills through military analysts and ordinary citizens alike. Diplomatic shockwaves are now rippling through Europe. Long-standing alliances are shifting at breakneck speed. Hungary and Slovakia, traditionally resistant to harsher measures, have abruptly backed sweeping new sanctions. Austria has dropped its objections. Simultaneously, the European Union is gripped by internal discord and public anger, as leaders race to keep pace with events that threaten to spiral beyond control. The last time Europe saw such a rapid realignment was during the Balkan crises of the 1990s, when alliances shifted overnight and policy reversals caught entire populations off guard. Amid the chaos, former President Trump has abruptly canceled a headline meeting with Putin and is now championing a controversial new peace proposal. Every diplomatic move is intensifying the sense of uncertainty and risk. It is reminiscent of the shifting strategies of World War I, when leaders made and broke alliances in a desperate bid to avoid catastrophe, only to stumble into it instead. Missing these rapid developments could leave you vulnerable to economic shocks, surging energy prices, or, in the worst case, the outbreak of war across Europe. Ordinary citizens in Poland, Germany, and the Baltic states are already taking precautions, stocking up on essentials and reviewing family emergency plans, just as their grandparents did in the shadow of the Iron Curtain. With tensions reaching new heights, each decision by global leaders becomes a potential turning point. What happens next could redefine European security for a generation. The aftermath could resemble the post-World War II order, with borders redrawn, economies shattered, and millions forced to rebuild their lives from scratch. This week, a handful of decisions have shifted the war's direction almost overnight. For the first time, the United States has lifted restrictions on how Ukraine can use Western-supplied long-range missiles. Now, Ukrainian forces are striking deep inside Russian territory, targeting infrastructure far beyond the border. Reports confirm Western cruise missiles hitting sites hundreds of miles from the front. This is a game-changer, similar to when the Allies in World War II began strategic bombing campaigns deep within enemy territory, targeting supply lines and factories far from the immediate battlefield. Moscow has answered with a dramatic display. President Vladimir Putin personally oversaw massive nuclear drills. Strategic bombers, nuclear submarines, and intercontinental missiles were all set in motion. Officials insist this is a test of readiness, but lawmakers admit it is also a warning to Europe and the United States. During the Cold War, such drills were often shrouded in secrecy, but today, Russia's message is deliberately public, designed to instill fear and caution among its adversaries. Media across the United States and Europe are sounding the alarm. Headlines focus on the shattered limits, the rising risk of miscalculation between nuclear powers, and the terrifying sense that each move inches the world closer to disaster. Analysts on late-night television debate whether the world is entering a new age of brinkmanship, where the old rules no longer apply and every action carries unforeseen dangers. To ignore these changes is to miss a turning point in global power. For ordinary people, the consequences are immediate: growing anxiety, rising costs, and the looming specter of a much wider war. Families in Eastern Europe are seeing energy bills rise sharply, while businesses across the continent brace for supply chain disruptions that could echo the chaos of the COVID-19 pandemic. But these headline-grabbing events are only the surface. Underneath, political leaders and military planners are scrambling to adapt to this new, more dangerous reality. Think tanks in Brussels and Washington are drafting scenario after scenario, trying to predict the next move. Will Russia escalate further, or will NATO double down? As missiles arc through the night sky, another conflict unfolds behind closed doors, one fought with secret bargains and shifting loyalties. In this shadowy theater, words cut deeper than steel, and allegiances are never fixed for long. Just as in the run-up to World War I, a single diplomatic misstep, an ill-chosen phrase, a misunderstood ultimatum, could set events spiraling out of control. Consider Hungary and Slovakia. For months, both nations resisted harsh penalties on Russia, stalling progress in Brussels. Now, in a dramatic reversal, they have sided with the majority and endorsed sweeping new European Union sanctions. This rare show of unity has broken the deadlock, exposing how swiftly alliances can transform under mounting pressure. In 1991, similar shifts occurred as the Soviet Union collapsed, with states realigning their loyalties almost overnight in response to changing realities. The sanctions package itself is unprecedented. Beginning in January of 2027, all Russian liquefied natural gas will be banned from European harbors. The crackdown extends far beyond energy. Chinese and Indian companies face penalties if they help Russia evade financial restrictions, while Russian banks and shadowy crypto networks are threatened with total isolation. The message is unmistakable. There will be no safe havens for those abetting Moscow. This strategy mirrors the economic isolation campaigns used against apartheid-era South Africa, which eventually forced policy changes through relentless international pressure. But these moves provoke fierce backlash. Tensions are spiking as French and Polish officials exchange accusations following suspected sabotage of vital infrastructure. The mere suggestion of pipeline attacks now triggers public shouting matches and exposes the fragility of Europe's energy lifelines. Each new incident sharpens the risk of escalation, turning suspicion into a weapon of its own. In 2022, the Nord Stream pipeline explosions revealed just how vulnerable Europe's energy arteries are, and every new incident revives those haunting memories. Across the Atlantic, the diplomatic landscape shifts again. Former President Trump has abruptly canceled his long-awaited summit with Vladimir Putin, instead proposing an immediate freeze of military lines. Some world leaders hail this as a chance to stop the bloodshed, while others denounce it as capitulation to Moscow. The resulting discord lays bare the fractured state of international resolve. Similar moments have played out in history, as during the Paris Peace Conference of 1919, when competing visions for Europe's future led to bitter divisions and ultimately unstable compromises. Inside Ukraine, the war's strain is tearing at the nation's fabric. Reports of brutality and corruption in the draft process have ignited outrage. Citizens accuse recruitment offices of violence and disappearances, while lawmakers call for sweeping reform to prevent a total collapse of public trust. The struggle for unity is becoming as fierce as the fight at the front. Ukraine's situation echoes that of Vietnam in the 1970s, when unpopular conscription policies fueled protest and eroded support for the war effort. Amid shifting alliances, harsher sanctions, and rising unrest, the stakes grow higher by the hour. One wrong move, on the battlefield or in the halls of power, could trigger regional warfare, a financial crisis, or political chaos spanning continents. In 1914, the assassination of a single archduke triggered World War I. Today, an errant missile or failed negotiation could have equally dire consequences. Yet for all the maneuvering, the outcome remains perilously uncertain. Every actor is gambling with more than just strategy. The fate of Europe hangs in the balance. Like chess masters in a high-stakes tournament, leaders weigh every move, knowing the next could decide not only their nation's future, but the world's. Both sides brace for the worst, though faint hopes for a diplomatic breakthrough linger. The horizon feels more uncertain than ever, each new headline hinting at futures hardly imagined a year ago. Citizens across Europe check the news compulsively, searching for any sign of de-escalation, even as military recruiters knock on doors and air raid sirens occasionally disturb the night. French military officials are raising urgent alarms, warning that if current trends hold, a direct confrontation with Russia could come within the next 4 years. From Moscow's vantage, NATO's latest moves seem less like defense and more like deliberate steps toward open war. Russian state media has begun referencing the years before Operation Barbarossa, when the Soviet Union watched with growing dread as German troops massed on its borders. On the ground, Russia and Ukraine each claim momentum, but Western analysts see a harsher truth, a grinding stalemate, threatening to drag on for years. Russia now calls up more reservists, not only for the front lines, but to guard power plants, railways, and fuel depots deep within its own borders, evidence of a homeland under siege after a wave of daring attacks. The death tolls, though seldom shared in full, are climbing, and the human cost is becoming impossible to ignore. Across Europe, governments scramble to adapt. The European Union is forging new ties in Central Asia, hunting for energy and trade partners as connections with Russia unravel. These shifting alliances and harsh new sanctions are reshaping the continent's political and economic order in ways few could have predicted 12 months ago. In a sense, Europe is reenacting its own Marshall Plan, searching for new sources of prosperity and security in a rapidly fragmenting world. The stakes could not be higher. If leaders miscalculate, the fallout might be catastrophic. A wider regional war, deeper economic upheaval, or an endless conflict that traps millions in limbo. The choices made in the coming months will decide if Europe slips further toward disaster, or manages a fragile peace. It is a delicate balancing act, where the margin for error grows thinner by the day. In backrooms and war rooms alike, a sense of urgency prevails. Every move now carries consequences that could echo for generations. Even the smallest diplomatic gesture or military maneuver is scrutinized by intelligence agencies, financial markets, and anxious citizens alike. So, with the world on edge and headlines shifting every hour, what can you actually do, and what should you watch for next? First, stay vigilant for sudden policy shifts. A single unexpected move from Washington, Moscow, or Brussels can spark immediate ripples across financial markets, energy prices, and local security. Sometimes the consequences unfold within a single day. For example, the Brexit vote in 2016 triggered instant currency crashes and upended trade overnight. A similar shock could occur if new sanctions or military escalations are announced without warning. Second, recognize the true economic stakes. Sanctions, embargoes, and threats to supply chains are not just diplomatic chess pieces. They hit home. Rising energy bills, empty store shelves, or wild market swings could soon affect not just Europe, but every corner of the world. Recall the OPEC oil embargo of 1973, when sudden shortages led to months of rationing, inflation, and economic turmoil across the West. Today's interconnected economies are even more vulnerable to such disruptions. Third, do not underestimate the power of unpredictable alliances or internal dissent. Seemingly solid partnerships between nations can fracture overnight, changing everything. Domestic unrest, like reform protests in Ukraine or EU political squabbles, can force leaders into choices that impact millions. The Arab Spring showed how quickly a single protest can set off a chain reaction, toppling governments and redrawing regional alliances in a matter of weeks. Fourth, be disciplined in your information diet. In this era of information warfare, reliable sources matter more than ever. Resist the urge to accept easy good versus evil stories. Reality is tangled, and propaganda thrives on confusion. During the Balkan Wars of the 1990s, misinformation campaigns fueled ethnic violence and prolonged conflict. Today's digital age amplifies these dangers, as deepfakes and viral rumors can sway public opinion and government policy in hours. The true danger is not only on distant front lines, it is civic complacency at home. If you and your community tune out or trust the wrong voices, you risk being blindsided by shocks or manipulated into supporting perilous policies. Just as in the lead-up to World War II, when appeasement and denial allowed aggression to flourish, today's passivity could prove equally costly. Let's pull this together with one key takeaway and a challenge for everyone watching. Amid these shifting tides, your vigilance and discernment are not just wise, they are essential. Here's what you can do to prepare, starting now. First, educate yourself about the basics of European security and energy infrastructure. Learn how pipelines, railways, and power grids connect across borders, and consider how disruptions could impact your daily life. For example, in January 2021, a cyber attack on a single American pipeline caused fuel shortages across multiple states. Similar attacks in Europe could have far-reaching consequences. Second, diversify your sources of information. Follow reputable news outlets from different countries, and pay attention to reports from international organizations like the United Nations or the International Energy Agency. This broader perspective can help you spot trends and anticipate developments before they hit the headlines. Third, strengthen your own resilience. Keep some emergency supplies at home, review your family's communication plan, and stay informed about local security advisories. These practical steps are not just for doomsday preppers. They are common sense in uncertain times. During the early days of the COVID-19 pandemic, those who planned ahead were able to adapt more quickly to shortages and lockdowns. Fourth, engage in community discussions and civic activities. Join online forums, attend local meetings, or organize information sessions to help others stay informed. The stronger your local network, the better you can respond to sudden changes. During the London Blitz of World War II, neighborhood groups played a vital role in maintaining morale and distributing aid. Your community can do the same today. In moments like this, the greatest danger is assuming someone else is watching closely enough. Today, the world spins through a gale of shifting loyalties, sharp rhetoric, and unpredictable escalations. It is tempting to trust that leaders and institutions have events under control. Yet, beneath the surface, the situation is far more brittle than it appears. The collapse of Yugoslavia in the 1990s showed how quickly order can unravel, even in seemingly stable societies. Ignoring today's warning signs could cost more than ever before. Each new policy twist or military movement layers complexity onto a crisis that now stretches beyond just two nations at war. This is a trial of international resolve, trust, and the ability to adapt, or else face the consequences of inaction. History teaches that the most perilous moment often arrives not with an uproar, but with quiet, when too many hesitate, hoping others will act. That silence is dangerous, because the machinery of crisis grinds on, even when we look away. Energy supplies, alliances, and even the idea of peace are more fragile than we care to admit. As this story unfolds, the bravest act is not to wait for certainty, but to demand clarity and readiness now. Our security, both personal and collective, rests on realizing the stakes have silently climbed to new heights. What comes next will be shaped not only by those with the loudest voices, but also by the vigilance and response of every citizen. So as Europe stands at the crossroads, the question is not just what leaders will choose, but what you will do. Stay informed, stay connected, and never underestimate your role in shaping the future. We are all living history. Let's not be caught off guard.